Part 1, Breads, of A Little Cookbook for a Little Girl. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Recording by Jill Ingle. A Little Cookbook for a Little Girl by Caroline French Benton. Part 1, Breads. Toast. Toast is very difficult for grown people to make because they have made it wrong all their lives. But it is easy for little girls to learn to make because they can make it right from the first. Cut bread that is at least 2 days old into slices 1/4 of an inch thick. If you're going to make only a slice or two, take the toasting fork. But if you want a plateful, take the Weir broiler. Be sure the fire is red without any flames. Move the slices of bread back and forth across the coals, but do not let them brown. Do both sides this way, and then brown first one and then the other afterward. Trim off the edges, butter a little quickly, and send to the table hot. Baker's bread makes the best toast. Milk toast. Put 1 pint of milk on in a double boiler and let it heat. Melt 1 tablespoon of butter, and when it bubbles, stir in 1 small tablespoonful of cornstarch. And when these are rubbed smooth, put in 1/3 of the milk. Cook and stir till even, without lumps, and then put in the rest of the milk and stir well. Add 1/2 teaspoonful of salt and put on the back of the stove. Make 6 slices of toast. Put 1 slice in the dish and put a spoonful of the white sauce over it. Then put in another and another spoonful, and so on, till all are in, and pour the sauce that is left over all. If you want this extra nice, do not take quite so much butter, and use a pint of cream instead of milk. Baking powder biscuit. Margaret's other aunt said little girls could never make biscuit, but this little girl really did, by this rule. 1 pint sifted flour, 1/2 teaspoonful of salt, 4 teaspoonfuls of baking powder, 3/4 cup of milk, 1 tablespoonful of butter. Put the salt and baking powder in the flour and sift well, and then rub the butter in with a spoon. Little by little put in the milk, mixing all the time, and then lift out the dough on a floured board and roll it out lightly, just once, till it is 1 inch thick. Flour your hands and mold the little balls as quickly as you can, and put them close together in a shallow pan that has had a little flour shaken over the bottom, and bake in a hot oven about 20 minutes or till the biscuits are brown. If you handle the dough much, the biscuits will be tough, so you must work fast. Grandmother's cornbread. 1½ cups of milk, 1 cup sifted yellow cornmeal, 1 tablespoonful melted butter, 1 teaspoonful sugar, 1 teaspoonful baking powder, 2 eggs, 1/2 teaspoonful of salt. Scald the milk, that is, let it boil up just once, and pour it over the cornmeal. Let this cool while you are separating and beating the eggs. Let these wait while you mix the cornmeal, the butter, salt, baking powder, and sugar, and then the yolks. Add the whites last, very lightly. Bake in a buttered biscuit tin in a hot oven for about ½ an hour. Because grandmother's cornbread was a little old-fashioned, Margaret's other aunt put in another recipe, which made the cornbread quite like cake and most delicious. Perfect cornbread. 1 large cup of yellow cornmeal, 1 small cup of flour, 1/2 cup of sugar, 2 eggs, 2 teaspoonfuls of baking powder, 3 tablespoonfuls of butter, 1 teaspoonful of salt, flour to a thin batter. Mix the sugar and butter and rub to a cream. Add the yolks of the eggs well beaten, and then 1/2 cup of milk. Then put in the baking powder mixed in the flour and the salt, and then part of the cornmeal and a little more milk. Next fold in beaten whites of the eggs, and if it is still not like a thin batter, put in a little more milk. Then bake in a buttered biscuit tin till brown, cut in squares, and serve hot. This is particularly good eaten with hot maple syrup. Popovers. Put the muffin tins or iron gem pans in the oven to get very hot while you mix these popovers. 2 eggs, 2 cups of milk, 2 cups of flour, 1 small teaspoonful of salt. Beat the eggs very lightly without separating them. Pour the milk in and beat again. Sift the salt and flour together. Pour over the eggs and milk into it, and beat quickly with a spoon till it is foamy. Strain through a wire sieve, and take the hot pans out of the oven and fill each one half full. Bake just 25 minutes. Cooking school muffins. 2 cups sifted flour, 2 teaspoonfuls baking powder, 1/2 teaspoonful of salt, 1 cup milk, 2 eggs, 1 large teaspoonful of melted butter. Mix the flour, salt, and baking powder and sift. Beat the yolks of the eggs, put in the butter with them and the milk, then the flour, and last the stiff whites of the eggs. Have the muffin tins hot, pour in the batter, and bake 15 or 20 minutes. These must be eaten at once or they will fall. There was one little recipe in Margaret's book which she thought must be meant for the smallest girl who ever tried to cook, it was so easy. But the little muffins were good enough for grown people to like. This was it. Barneys. 4 cups of whole wheat flour, 3 teaspoonfuls of baking powder, 1 teaspoonful of salt, enough water to make it seem like cake batter. Drop with a spoon into hot buttered muffin pans and bake in an oven about 15 minutes. Bridget had to show Margaret what was meant by a cake batter, but after she had seen once just how thick that was, she could always tell in a minute when she had put in water enough. Griddle cakes. 2 eggs, 1 cup of milk, 1 1/2 cups flour, 2 teaspoonfuls of baking powder, 1/2 teaspoonful of salt. Put the eggs in a bowl without separating them, and beat them with a spoon till light. Put in the milk, then the flour mixed with the salt, and last the baking powder all alone. Bake on a hot buttered griddle. This seems a queer rule, but it makes delicious cakes, especially if eaten with sugar and thick cream. Flannel cakes. 1 tablespoonful of butter, 1 tablespoonful of sugar, 2 eggs, 2 cupfuls of flour, 1 teaspoonful of baking powder, milk enough to make a smooth, rather thin batter. Rub the butter and sugar to a cream. Add the eggs beaten together lightly, then the flour in which you have mixed the baking powder, and then the milk. It is easy to know when you have the batter just right, for you can put a tiny bit on the griddle and make a little cake. If it rises high and is thick, put more milk in the batter. If it is too thin, it will run about on the griddle, and you must add more flour. But it is better not to thin it too much, but to add more milk if the batter is too thick. Sweet corn griddle cakes. These ought to be made of fresh sweet corn, but you can make them in winter out of canned grated corn, or canned corn rubbed through a colander. 1 quart grated corn, 1 cup of flour, 1 cup of milk, 1 tablespoonful melted butter, 4 eggs, 1/2 teaspoonful of salt. Beat the eggs separately and put the yolks into the corn. Then add the milk, then the flour, then the salt, and beat well. Last of all, fold in the whites and bake on a hot griddle. Waffles. 2 cups of flour, 1 teaspoonful baking powder, 1 1/2 cups of milk, 1 tablespoonful butter, 1/2 teaspoonful of salt, 3 eggs beaten separately. Mix the flour, baking powder, and salt. Put the beaten egg yolks in the milk, and add the melted butter, the flour, and last the beaten whites of the eggs. Make the waffle iron very hot and grease it very thoroughly on both sides by tying a little rag to a clean stick and dipping in melted butter. Put in some batter on one side, filling the iron about half full, and close the iron, putting this side down over the fire. When it has cooked for about 2 minutes, turn the iron over without opening it, and cook the other side. When you think it is done, open it a little and look to see if it is brown. If not, keep it over the coals till it is. Take out the waffle, cut in 4 pieces, and pile on a plate in the oven, while you again grease the iron and cook another. Serve very hot and crisp with maple syrup or powdered sugar and thick cream. Some people like honey on their waffles. You might try all these things in turn. End of Part 1. Breads.